Good afternoon. I'm calling the January 24th, 2018 meeting of the Planning Commission to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioners Donenfeld, Hirschbein,
Present.
Hudson, Maruzzi,
Present.
Vice Chair Callardine, present, and Chair Wormick.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Can we have a report on the posting of the agenda?
Madam Chair, the agenda was posted on Thursday, January the 18th. This meeting has been noticed and posted in accordance with state law.
As we get to the acceptance of the agenda, I'd like to make a motion that we move items 3 and 3B, new business, ahead of item 2, which is a public hearing. If I have a second for that? So we have a motion made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. In acceptance of the agenda, do we need a motion to accept it from this, Flynn?
No, since
okay?
You've already changed the order and voted on that, then you have accepted the agenda as amended.
Okay, this is a time for public comments. This time has been set aside for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on consent calendar and other agenda items and items of general interest within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission. Please note that the Commission is prohibited from taking actions from items that are not on the agenda. Each speaker will be allowed 3 minutes for public testimony. If you are speaking on items 3 and 3B, now would be the time to testify if you wish to testify.
Make sure she's got a mic.
I live at 321 West Overlook Glen Road. Oh, I'm addressing item 3B. Overlook Glen Road is a private access road directly to the south of the property on 350 El Portal. There are two concerns, one of which I emailed to Mr. Malacher and you have, about water runoff, because there's an arroyo up the hill that shoots right down that road. The second is that my neighbor, Mr. and Mrs. Dunn, that there are only 2 houses up at the end of the cul-de-sac, and we very much like to be able to get home. And if any building material or vehicles pursuant to this project are parked on the Overlook Glen Road, I'm just going to have to, the elbow on the horn will, but the builders, the owners must be assured that everything has to take place on El Portal. And other than that, have a great day.
Thank you.
Certainly.
If you would step forward.
Yes. I'm Jay Reynolds, architect. I'm actually speaking, good afternoon, about item 3A, and our clients are asking and requesting an extension for a major architectural approval for the construction of their 3,857 square foot house. And we have been working to get those drawings into the building department for a permit, and actually we're going to file in late November, and then Rick Grinnell is being asked to, actually he is probably going to be in Germany for the next 2 years because he's been appointed, or at least is waiting for final confirmation to be the ambassador of Germany. So he's asked that he really, and he and his partner really this is our 3rd project with them, and we would love to, you know, they wanted to be here throughout the process, and they just said, I think I would be pulling, you know, not my hair, but their hair out during the process. So they asked if we would go through and look at an extension for 1 year, and then we'll take the project back up, get it into the building department, and probably start, hopefully, within the next year.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to testify?
Okay. My name is Jim McCatherine. I'm the architect for the project for item 3B. And we have worked on this project, my client and I, for about a year and have come up with a solution that has satisfied the AAC. And we've addressed numerous letters from various neighbors in the area concerning views, saving view corridors, and trying to save some of the trees and anything else. And the my client, he can't be here. He's got the flu and is really under the weather. But he's a great guy, and I'm sure he'll cooperate fully with any of the neighborhood complaints that come up during construction. All the construction and access and what have you will be via El Portal. There's no plans to even encroach on the access easement or the private access to the rear of the property. And we'll get that in writing. I'm sure he'll talk to the subs and make sure that happens.
We may call you back for questions
Okay.
when we bring the item up.
That'll be fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak?
How do you do? I'm Bill Beck. I live at 356 West El Portal for a long time. This project that's taking place that Jim and Claudio are preparing, I think finally has become a terrific idea for our property that's below. Our property at one time was just about an acre, and it's been like split in half. And Claudio and Jim, they've put the new project together, and it's the first time I've seen it that really looks like it's a good deal. And it's a pretty house. It's got plenty of room, plenty of property, and we accept that. 8 years ago, I didn't. There was something else. It was a two-story house. That's not the situation here anymore. It's a very well constructed house, Jim, and you did a wonderful job on that. And the only question we ever had, and Claudio and Jim came up to the house, and I said, the only problem I had is that I got two twin palms, in which you're going to be taking one out, and they're only 80 years old. They're fabulous. So I said, okay, what we can do is take it out and move it over 4 feet. Okay, that's an option. Of course, I like to see it stay where it is, obviously, and then you put the driveway on the left-hand side, and then everybody's happy. I have a lawn that's being cut into for about 15 feet, and tell you the truth, I was going to put jacuzzi there. So it's a little change in my direction as far as what I want to do with the property. I agree with Claudio, the owner, and Jim, what they've come up with, and I think everybody is happy with that. They've come up a couple times, and if it has anything to do with having to have more footage because of what's allowed or not allowed, and as far as the property is concerned, I think that would all be squared away. We have no problems with that, other than the fact that if it needs its 4 more feet, we have property on the left-hand side where they could take 4 feet there, or on the street side, which we have our property going all the way up, about 300 feet from the driveway. They can take 5 feet from there, 6 feet from there, 10 feet from there without moving the palm tree. That's the only problem I have. The construction of the house looks fantastic. It'd be great for the mesa. I think everybody would appreciate it. And it will actually, I think, place the value of the mesa straight up. It's a good piece of property, and Jim did a nice job in putting the map together in regards to what.
Thank you. We may call you back, or when we address item 3B. Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to testify? There being no one else, I'm going to close the public hearing.
Public comment.
Moving right along to the consent calendar. Do I have a motion or is there comment on?
Same move. So moved.
Second.
Would you call the roll? Any comments? Please call the roll.
I have a motion maker who made the second.
I did.
I made the,
Mr. Caladine made the motion. Lynn, vote.
I'm sorry.
That passes 6-0. Moving right along to new business, item 3A. Rick Grinnell and Matthew Lashy for a one-year time extension of a major architectural approval for the construction of a 3,857 square foot house on a hillside located at 141 Mountain Ridge Drive, Zone R1AH. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This project was approved by the Planning Commission on January 13th of 2016. The approvals for major architecturals are good for 2 years. So this entitlement is about to expire. The applicant did submit an application to extend it. He is requesting 2 years. However, staff has written the approval for a one-year extension. The Planning Commission could grant a 2-year extension if it feels that is necessary. So this is on the slide in front of you. This is a 3D image of the approved design of the house. It is in Ridge Mountain Development, which is a 9-unit subdivision at the end of South Palm Canyon Drive. If you remember, the Planning Commission had the applicant do scale models, had some story poles that were approved eventually at the January 13, 2016 meeting. Here is some architectural elevations which were included in your packet, and some additional 3D images of the project. So you'll see in your staff report that the findings that need to be made to make a time extension, one of them is that the delay in construction is due to the applicant's overseas assignment. All effort has been made by him in the past 2 years to exercise the entitlement and construct the new homes, which is evident in the development of architectural plans and finalized technical reports. The property owner has indicated that that the plans will be submitted shortly, and based upon this information, staff feels that the applicant has successfully demonstrated a willingness and ability to start the project within the time extension request. The layout, design, and overall concept and scope has not changed, and the proposal remains compatible with existing developments with the on-site and surrounding areas. Thus, staff feels that the findings have been met in support of the time extension. So that concludes my report, and as you mentioned, the project architect is here for any questions.
Are there questions? Yes, I'm going to start with Commissioner Donovan.
I just have one question. Why is staff recommending only 1 year as opposed to 2? If this applicant is going to be overseas on a diplomatic assignment, it's going to be very difficult for them to go back and forth. Is there any particular reason why you limited it to 1 as opposed to 2 years?
Going back to when we went through the process of amending the code relative to extensions of time, at that point in time, the Planning Commission expressed a preference that we go with 1-year increments on the extensions of these types of applications. However, you do have the ability, in terms of the way the code is written, to grant a 2-year extension at this point in time. So either you could do a 1 and 1, or you could do a 2-year. Again, it depends on the mitigating circumstances.
Thank you.
This is questions of staff. Commissioner Hirschfeld.
During that time when we amended those rules, can you refresh my memory? Is there a maximum amount of time for extensions?
2 years is the maximum time that's allowed.
Regardless of whether they're in 1 year increments
Correct.
or 1 2 year increment.
Correct.
That would be it. That'd be the
Yes.
sunset. And there's no ability for planning to revise that once the 2 years would be up?
No.
Thank you.
I have a question. Oh, sorry. Commissioner Callardine.
I don't know if my question's for staff or for the applicant, but
This is only questions of staff.
I do have a question for the applicant.
Then I have one question for staff, which is, we've been asked by City Council to include solar in discretionary permits. Can you refresh our memory as to whether solar is included in this approved design?
In looking at the conditions of approval, there's no requirement for them to add solar to this project.
Okay, I will open this up to questions for the applicant. If no one else, Commissioner Callardine has one. I know I had one, if anybody else does.
I guess my question for the applicant would be, is 2 years going to be adequate if he's appointed an ambassadorship?
And ready for, thank you, ready for then the vertical construction when they start to come, about 6 months after they start to, or 6 months before they were going to come back. So 2 years, he knows, and I already told him that that's the limit that you have. So we have to dig some soil and do something to vest the entitlement. So that was the consideration, and I would hope that, you know, the commission would grant 2 years, because we do need.
We could end up with a graded and foundation situation for an extended period of time.
Right, and I don't think that's really like conducive for, you know, I don't, it kind of would look like the burnt, you know, the steel, the rotting steel structure that's still up there on another lot that's not too far away, that's been there for over 10 years.
End up with that type of situation.
And we wouldn't put the steel up, we'd just put concrete in, but that's to vest the rights for the entitlement, we know we have to do something.
I know, but I still, I don't hope that doesn't end up being the actual condition.
Yeah, right.
And I don't know if there's anything we can do to address that.
On the question of solar, because we'll come back to comments. Is there solar on the property?
There is solar planned on the roofs, that's right.
So if you would voluntarily, for the applicant, agree to solar as a condition of approval of this extension?
I believe we had already included that on the plans. I don't know the percentage, but we put as much as we could. I think we did a study of the requirement to put, you know, as much as we could, and I think we have plenty of roof area, so I don't see that that's a problem to actually put that in there, because we had planned for it. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
Opening this up to discussion, we're not discussing the project, we're only discussing the conditions. I had made a motion to approve for 1 year with the addition of recognizing that solar is on the drawings.
Can we go for 2?
The reason I want to do 1 year is because they only have 2. I want to make sure that they don't lose the timing of it by having a 2-year extension and then not take the steps they need to take to perfect it. So, well, if you have a 1-year extension and we require that they pull I would like that they also pull the permit in that time, they're at least prepared to hold on to the site and move forward. If they don't move forward, given that they have approved plans, and I think we all liked your plans, I remember actually loving your plans when they came up before, you would only have to you'd have to refile. So I just wanted them to be as prepared as possible with this and stay with the 1-year extension. So that's the reason I have a 1 year. I'm going along with staff on this. You can ask a question. I may not get a second on this, so we'll see.
Based on Mr. Callardine's concern, and it's certainly been, we've seen projects vest, and I'll use air quotes for that, in the city before and then not proceed. Is there any protections against that that we can, conditions that we can put upon the approval?
You mean in terms of them pulling a building permit, starting construction, but not finishing?
Yes.
The things that we can do come from a code enforcement standpoint. Building permits have a period of time under which construction must proceed. If construction halts for a certain period, then the building permit expires. Once the building permit expires, we can go in with code enforcement and have them restore the site. So there are options available to us if they start construction but do not finish.
So it's sort of.
We're in comments right now. Go ahead.
So it's sort of extra, it's kind of baked into the codes already. It's nothing that, and there's no additional protections as planning commission that we can insert into conditions.
No, there really aren't at this point in time.
Commissioner Callardine? Comments?
Would that, yes, I'm just following up on that question. Would that apply as well if they pulled a grading permit or a foundation permit? Does that, but not the formal building permit, or does the foundation require a formal building permit?
The foundation would require a formal building permit.
So once they pull the building permit, then they've got so many months, years to
Months
to finish, to begin to finish the thing?
To finish or to start?
To start construction and keep construction moving forward.
So if the project's, hypothetically, the project's abandoned, for how long? I mean, what would be the time frame?
And I'm going to apologize. I don't know the
okay, so
exact
for whatever that time
period on
frame
building
is,
permits.
What is the remedy the city has?
The remedy, again, is code enforcement, that we can have them restore the site back to its original condition.
All right, thanks.
My question has to do, again, with staff. The Cameron project at the end of my street has a situation where they've put in...
That may not be in order unless it's going to this project.
What is related to what I'm asking, to the issue?
Okay.
They started the project, they put in pipes, I guess they did some groundwork, but it's been sitting there for years. So how does that relate to how much has to be done and how long? You said it's how long is the permit?
Yeah, this is not the Cameron. I just want to make it clear, this is a single-family house. It's much different in terms of the scope of development and what's required. There's different language under our plan development ordinance in terms of what constitutes exercising the permit. So again, there are two different situations here. The application that you have in question is an extension of time on this residence, and so your comment should be focused on the extension of time. Does it meet the criteria, and whether or not you should grant that?
Are there other comments? I had some, he obviously can come back in a year for an extension for up to 2. The applicant could have chosen to not go for an extension and come back in. They've clearly decided not to do that. So what's in front of us is whether or not we want to go forward with an extension. I would rather go forward with the 1 year, see where they are at the end of a year, let them come back for a second if they haven't moved forward.
I'll second your motion then.
And it includes solar since the applicant is intending to put solar on. I'm not going to specify the amount because at this point we don't know what was on the original drawings, and I don't think we need to. Can we call? We have a motion and a second. Can you call the roll, please? Is there any more discussion? The extension passes 6-0. Thank you. Okay, 3B, Bravo Properties, Inc., for a major architectural application for the construction of a 4,595 square foot house on a hillside lot located at 350 El Portal, Zone R1B. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This property, looking at the site plan that's on the screen, was once owned by the property to the west, the Becks. At this time, there's a driveway that bisects this property that will be removed to make way for the construction of this new house. On the west end of the property, there's a new driveway that will be constructed. When the AEC reviewed this project back on December 4th, and then once again on January 2nd, 2018, the driveway has been narrowed to save one of the two trees that the Becks have been concerned about. So
Can you point out the trees?
Sure. I have a slide at the very end. Let me go to the end. So this is a blow up of the front of the property where El Portal is, and you can see in the middle under the red cloud there are two little stars. Those are the palm trees that the Becks had requested that they be saved. So the driveway was narrowed to 12 feet to allow the saving of one, and as you can see, the other one is in the middle of the road. So they are proposing to move that palm tree somewhere onto the Becks property to save it. So the property, as you see, it's an L-shaped house, 4,500 some square feet. It faces west with a grassy area in the rear and a future pool also to the rear. As the neighbors had mentioned, there is an access road that runs from El Portal behind this property. The proposal is to add a block wall 6 foot tall that will run behind the house and adjacent to the driveway. So there'll be no construction materials or no construction activity on the access road as proposed. One of the requirements of the city engineering department is a dedication, street dedication. So you'll see in the front of the site plan, there are two dashed black lines. They are proposing to dedicate 10 feet so that will site the house 20 feet from the front property line. However, it will be 25 feet from the previous lot. The zoning code allows this automatic reduction of the setback when street is dedicated for city purposes. So the development standards have all been met for this R1B property. The house has a maximum height of 16 feet. It's 12 feet at the front setback line and then 16 feet to a raised portion in the rear. So let me give you a building elevation showing the front which is a 3-car garage and the front entrance coming off of El Portal. There are some 3D images here showing the front, what it will look like from the street. The landscape plan includes use of desert plants, accent plants. The Architecture Advisory Committee worked with the applicant to come up with a landscape plan that was adequate, and it did receive final approval from them. The building material board, I placed it on the DS, which may be being passed around. I think Peter has it there, or maybe it's being... so that shows the colors and the materials proposed. Notice was sent to all property owners in accordance with the zoning code, which has resulted with our neighbors visiting today and making testimony. So you will see that there are several emails from the residents that I want to point out. There's a resolution and conditions of approval that are included in your staff report. We have made the findings to recommend approval of the project, and there's a categorical exemption for hillside development, and a notice of determination will be filed once the entitlement is secured. So that concludes my report today, and as you mentioned, the applicant is here.
Questions for staff, starting with Commissioner Maruzzi, if you have questions, going down the line.
I guess it doesn't pertain specifically to this project, but what is a categorical exemption?
When we do the California Environmental Quality Act, we determined that this is an infill project and it does not require an initial study or any environmental analysis.
Oh, okay, thank you.
With respect to the road that's in the back of the property, that you referred to it as an access road, is that the same thing as the arroyo that was also referred to in the comment that we received on this project?
My understanding, and we don't have a hydrology or grading plan for the rear properties, but as the neighbors have said, the water does wash down that access road onto this property.
So the property will be walled off from that access road with a back wall right at the perimeter of the access road line, right at the property line?
I know it's difficult to look in this grading plan, but on the back, you'll see that there's a dark dash line that shows the block wall, and towards the panhandle of this lot, it shows landscaping. So, you know, there's conditions of approval from the engineering department that will address all of these drainage issues. But looking at this plan, and maybe the applicant, the project architect can mention, talk to this, it looks like the wall doesn't continue the whole way through, which may allow the water to pass through the lot.
It would be important to know that from the architect, I would think.
Is the condition you're referring to the rear yard where you're looking at the 9 foot 8 inch wall?
No, and I can explain that if you would like, what that wall is.
Yes, please.
So in this slide, as the driveway enters from El Portal is in the background, there's a wall that has to be built to elevate the driveway. So as you drive up the driveway, it curves onto the Beck's property. This is a view of the rear. So the panhandle is to the right, and that's where the water will come down from the neighbors above. So this is the wall that's 9 feet tall is on the west side of the property line.
So can you explain, can you show us where the water comes down? I'm sorry,
yes.
It's...
I don't see
either.
If I can interject here.
And maybe the city...
The engineering
department can, and maybe go up and show us on the drawing as well.
Well, regardless of the location of the wall, the project applicant needs to prepare a hydrology study showing the impacts of the offsite drainage going through his lot, and that one of the conditions is that the lot has to accept the drainage. So even if there is a wall there, it may require the installation of inlets or some other, or wall openings, something to allow the water to pass through. But that can't be determined until he does the hydrology study. There is already a condition on the lot that he has to accept the offsite drainage and then convey it. When the plans come in and a study comes in, we can figure out the extent of the drainage that needs to be conveyed, and then what improvements need to be constructed in order to convey that drainage.
So my understanding is that the access road in the back may well be the way the water travels downstream or down the hill. But if there's any overlap onto the property in question, some alteration to a impervious wall would have to be made to accept that water runoff.
Either an alteration of the impervious wall or a catch basin or some type of conveyance facility adjacent to the wall to accept the drainage.
And that will be done when the hydrology studies are done as part of the permitting process.
That will be done as part of the plans, but the hydrology study will inform us as to what improvements need to be constructed and where those improvements need to be.
Other questions of staff? Commissioner Calvert?
Is there some chance, I guess, that the hydrology study could end up really changing the conceptual plans that we have in front of us? Are we comfortable that the wall could be built where it is and the pool could be built where it's proposed?
I am comfortable that pretty much anything can be engineered given enough time and money. So, I'm
a little nervous, but that's okay. Speaking of that wall, Is there any landscaping proposed along that wall on the private properties, on the other property side, since it's a private street?
This is a copy of, the slide shows the landscape plan.
Right.
In the original submittal to AAC, the applicant had a row of ficus on the east side, which is the right property
Yeah, I
line
remember
and the
that.
access road, and that they were removed. The neighbors to the east did not want them blocking views, so they removed landscaping from the rear.
I understand that. I'm talking about the north side there along the private road. If you look at that private road, there is landscape. The neighbor to the east has provided a ficus, sort of a ficus hedge along his edge of that property to landscape that roadway. It's going to be, and there's also a block wall on the far side of it with some landscaping in between. And so it's going to be very stark there with just block wall on this property side, plus whatever's on the other side. And I would think we would owe it, normally if that was certainly a public street, we would require some landscaping there. And even though it's a private street, it may be appropriate to provide some landscaping of some sort there.
So if you look at your staff report, there are 3 photographs of existing conditions. The second and third photograph are actually taken from the access road. So you'll see that the road is macadam or asphalt, and then it drops off with just creosote shrubs and bushes. So those are, and the neighbor does show a wall with the ficus that Commissioner Calendine just spoke of.
Would it be appropriate to consider a condition that we might require landscaping of that wall?
I think that's a question for the planning director in terms of requiring landscaping on private property that's not the applicant's property.
It would be, probably would be the applicant.
So that, whether or not we can do that, that's a question for you, Flynn.
Typically on adjacent property, we aren't able to condition that.
But we could require it on the applicant's property.
On the applicant's property, yes, as part of this application. Keep in mind, and maybe Mr. Malacker can speak to this, there was a requirement from the Architectural Advisory Committee about not having ficus along that rear area.
Rear? Why? I thought it was on the eastern side.
It was. I'm assuming you're talking about on the northern
side.
Yeah. There's a portion of it where they didn't want that on the northern side either, there at the back corner of the house. But if you all wish to include that as a condition, you may certainly do so.
It doesn't have to be a ficus hedge. It should be. Let's see. Are we, for engineering, are we satisfied with the interim condition of the driveway in front, that's going to look fine?
Which engineering condition?
No, is engineering satisfied with the interim condition that will result from this project? I mean, we're not building the road to ultimate. Okay.
We're comfortable with that interim condition.
Just as an aside here, we're getting almost all of these houses up here having such an interim condition, which is almost clearly going to be the ultimate condition. We're not going to ever, I suspect it's unlikely we'll build the road to its ultimate width, and we should probably start focusing more on that interim condition, make sure that it's acceptable, rather than we spend a lot of time talking about the ultimate condition and then we defer everything with having to do with that.
If I may, the interim condition is, or the ultimate condition is based on the city's circulation element of the general plan, and until we revise the circulation element or the general plan, these are the conditions that we have to put forward.
Right, and I realize why we do that, but in practice, we don't foresee ever really building any of these roads up here in these places. So the interim is going to be the ultimate.
Upon acceptance of a new circulation element by the general plan, yes.
The site plan notes that the pool is being deferred. Is there, from permitting, is there a reason why that is, Glenn?
Well, that's the applicant's choice. There's no requirement to put a pool in. They will have to come in and apply for permits, pool permits in the future.
They have to do with the drainage. Let's see. We're comfortable with the drainage. We don't need a specific condition that say that Overlook Glen Road should not be used for construction?
If the commission so chooses, that could be an addition. Yeah.
Go through the last of my notes here, excuse me. And has the actual lot division between the two to make this second property a separate lot, has that occurred?
Yes, that has been recorded and accepted, yes.
I have some concerns about how that happened, but that's not really relevant today. So we sort of created effectively a non-standard lot, but that's neither here nor there. That's all my questions at the moment, Madam Chair.
I had one for staff, which is, again, going to the solar. Is there, at this point, the drawings don't show solar and the conditions don't require solar, but we have had a request from City Council to include solar in discretionary permits. So we would need to add a requirement of 2 watts of solar per square foot of building as a separate condition to the planning conditions, correct?
That's
and
correct.
I'm seeing a yes from the planning director on that. I have one question for the architect. I'm not sure if anybody else has a question for the architect.
Mike.
This is pretty simple. Mr. Beck's second tree,
Yes.
can that be placed any place he wants that placed on his property?
I would imagine, yes.
So you're willing to, if Mr. Beck says, yes, I want to save the second palm tree and this is where I want it put, you will move it for him?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. I think that's really a very simple question.
Yes.
Does anybody else have questions for the project architect? At this point, we're open for motions and discussion.
I'll move the staff recommendation with the addition of the solar requirement that you were talking about and the condition that no construction materials should be stored or construction should not occur from Overlook Glen Drive, and that there be some form of landscaping to be approved by the planning director along that back wall that would be adjacent to Overlook Glen Drive. It'd be landscaping on this project's property.
Commissioner Donenfeld.
I was all set to second it, but I have a little concern with requiring someone to landscape what is a horribly conditioned access road on a site, on a property that he doesn't even own. I mean, we're not in the business of cleaning up access roads on the backs of applicants for approvals, and it's such a shoddy road, I don't think any landscape would even approve it, and it's not their property. So I would take issue with that one item to your motion.
Are you making a substitute motion?
I would substitute everything Mr. Calladine moved except the landscaping of the other side of the
So
retaining
at
wall.
this point, we have a new motion by Commissioner Donenfeld. Do we have a second? Commissioner Hirschbein? We have a motion and a second discussion.
Yes. My proposal is that the landscaping would be on this property, not on the adjacent property. And that, yes, it looks pretty crummy back there in some areas, but I don't think that obviates the need to, that if there's any other condition out there, we would require some degree of landscaping and softening of that block wall. And the adjacent property to the east has provided such landscaping, and it would be could be a continuation of that landscaping.
So you're talking about landscaping on the property, within the property line on the...
Within a foot or two.
But not on the access road side, but on the property owner's side.
Yes, so you might have to shift the wall a foot or two. That's what we would normally require if that was a public...
Well, you know, AAC looked at this and gave us their opinion as to whether it was
I don't think they discussed this
sufficiently
issue.
landscaped. I'll stick with my motion.
I also agree that AAC has reviewed this, and I would like to stick with their recommendation.
Is there any other discussion? Can you call the question?
How high is that wall?
The wall is 6 foot tall.
And what is it, just concrete block or?
Right, it's precision block.
Precision block, okay, thank you.
Well, that's the motion to substitute, right? wait. So this is not the ultimate motion, right?
No, this is the motion.
Well,
Commissioner
that's-
Donenfeld put a substitute motion in that was seconded, and
Don't we have to vote on that?
we have to
replacing-
vote on the replacement motion first.
That's it. Whoops, excuse me. Meant to vote. No. See how it's going to go. Okay.
The substitute motion carries 5-0,
No.
or 5-1, sorry.
Now the ultimate motion.
We don't go back to the ultimate motion. My understanding is if the substitute motion has been approved, it's been approved. Am I correct?
That's my belief, is that that vote has carried as substituted with a vote of 5 to
And I
1.
can't vote for the project.
Right.
Somehow weird.
You can move to, if someone has voted no, can they move to change their vote?
Voted on the prevailing side. I think if you vote on the prevailing side, you can ask to move to recast your votes. Isn't that correct?
Shouldn't there be a
Reconsider
separate
the
motion
vote.
on the overall
There can be a
project
motion to
once it's-
reconsider if you voted on the prevailing side.
Yes, so actually, I guess if you'd like to, the way to clean this up perhaps is to make a motion
I would
to
do so. I
reconsider
want
the
Mr.
vote and then
Calladine to be
allow
able to
another
participate.
final
Whatever it
vote.
takes to vote for the ultimate
Having
project.
voted on the prevailing side, I move to reconsider the vote.
And at
There's a
this
second.
point, so we need a second on the same motion, correct?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
I'll
it's-
second it.
So it's been made by Commissioner Donenfeld and seconded. Yes. And now seconded by Commissioner Callardine.
I'm sorry, I need clarification on this.
Okay,
It's the same motion.
it's the same motion.
Board motion.
Mr. Callardine was concerned because the record is going to show him as technically having voted against the project. He voted no because he disagreed with my
Thank you.
substitute motion,
This-
but
We're voting on your motion.
Right, correct.
Revised, thank you.
And so can you correct who's made the motion, please, on our screens? Is Commissioner Donenfeld?
Donenfeld, and second is Callardine.
Right.
And can you,
We need to revote.
I'm going to do a voice roll call since I can't do two votes on the system. Commissioner Donenfeld?
yes.
Hirschbein? Hudson?
Yes.
Morosi?
Yes.
Vice Chair Callardine?
Yes.
And Chair Warmick?
yes,
Motion passes.
motion passes 6-0. Congratulations. That's the way, that's my understanding. Attorney. Okay. The commission is back in session. We're going to item 2. It's listed as a public hearing item, but I believe the public hearing was closed. Can you?
I believe we continued it to this meeting. Our vote at the last time was specifically to continue this item to today's meeting.
To continue the item, but what about the hearing?
The hearing also remains
Okay.
open.
So we will have a public hearing on Rosalind LLC for a planned development district, a minor architectural application, a conditional use permit, and a variance application proposing renovation and additions to an existing 62-room hotel to add an outdoor music venue, an outdoor restaurant use, an outdoor cocktail lounge, and support spaces at the Monroe Hotel, aka Infusion Beach Hotel, located at 1900 North Palm Canyon Drive. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As noted in your very small staff report that's before you today, this project was first heard on December 13th and was continued to January 10th. At that meeting, the Commission approved the variance application and the conditional use permits. So the matters before you today for consideration are the Planned Development District and the minor architectural application. As noted at the last meeting, you had a considerable amount of deliberation on the project, and you asked the applicant to meet with staff in order to further discuss options for public benefit. On January 17th, the applicants Matt Rogers and Chris Rosas met with representatives of the city, including myself, Director Fagg, Director Garcia, and went through a number of issues relative to public benefit. On the second page of your staff report, it goes into a little bit more detail on this, and as we note both in my staff report and the applicant has a letter which is attached, there are some clarifications that need to be made with respect to the issues of the items for which they're seeking deviations in the development standards. Number one, the new buildings that are being proposed are actually attached. When this project was first submitted to me and I was analyzing it, I had seen them as separate buildings, but in the course of the development of the project, recognizing this issue, they have attached the buildings. So the buildings are now attached, so these represent additions to the building rather than separate buildings, so the issue of separation or distances between buildings is moot. The second issue is that with the condition that the Commission imposed at the last meeting of limiting the occupancy to 210, the amount of off-street parking that's proposed at the remote lot at 2080 North Palm Canyon Drive, which is commonly referred to as the Dinks lot, actually is conforming in its quantity. So the deviation that's being sought with respect to parking is that rather than it being a self-park lot, it would be required to be valet parked because the parking lot capacity can only accommodate these numbers if it is valeted. With respect to the issue of setbacks, the applicant is requesting setback reductions. When you look at hotel uses within a C1 zone, and this property is split between C1 and R3, the development standards for hotels have setbacks that are greater than other commercial uses in the C1 zone. So what has been proposed here is that the applicant is proposing reductions in the setback for hotel uses. However, the setbacks that they have established and that they are proposing are consistent with the setbacks that would otherwise be imposed or required in the C1 zone. So in fact, it is a technical relief and development standards for hotels in R3, but it still does conform to the setback requirements for a C1 zone parcel. The other matter that is still an issue that is part of the development standards for which the applicant is seeking relief is the amount of usable open space in the site. As the hotel currently sits with no extra work or modifications to it, it has 41% open space. The applicant is requesting this be reduced to 38%. As noted, when you have a R3 zone, the required usable open space would be 45%. But when you have a C1 zone, there is no requirement for open space. So you have an existing development with 41% open space on a lot that has split zoning, half C1, half R3. So the request to go from 41% open space to 38% open space is technically a 3% reduction in open space. And the last item for which the applicant is seeking relief for the development standards, although the parking is conforming in terms of quantity, You had approved the variance at the last meeting with respect to distance for that remote parking, but the relief that's being sought is this parking lot does need to be parked at a valet basis in order to accommodate the number of parking spaces that are being proposed. The note I want to also make, there was a question from one of the commissioners whether or not the future use of the Dinks building could be self-parked or would also need to be valet parked. And the answer to that question is both the Dinks building's future uses and the remote parking that's being accommodated on this site for the Infusion Beach Hotel project both have to be valet parked because the site will not accommodate self-parking in the quantities that are being proposed. At your last meeting, the applicant had proposed the public benefit for the project being the project itself. That is the elimination and improvement of a fairly aging hotel with a lot of sort of rundown conditions and overgrown landscaping. So it was addressed in terms of addressing blight and then also in terms of increasing the economic activity in this part of the city by bringing more residents, bringing more activities, and thereby theoretically seeing more of these hotel rooms that are up in this part of the city being filled on a more frequent basis. With the discussion that we had with the applicant on the 17th, the applicant came forward with additional public benefit offerings. And they are listed in the middle of your second page of your staff report. Number one, they are looking at proposing to replace the public sidewalks along the project frontages that are buckled, cracking, and posing tripping hazards. This public sidewalk would be replaced all the way up to Via Escuela. The second thing that they're proposing is that the installation of palm tree lights along the east side of Palm Canyon Drive, that's their frontage in this case, from the southern edge of their project also to the corner of Via Escuela, be improved with pedestrian lighting on those trees, which will include, which will basically provide for lighting at the sidewalk as well as enhanced decorative lighting on the palm trees. So as I've noted in the bottom of that paragraph, the amount of issues for which the applicant is seeking relief through the use of the PD are fewer than what was originally discussed in your staff reports in the previous meetings. The project is now offering, the tangible project benefits which are being offered are greater than what you had seen previously when it was only proposed as the project itself. And with the elimination of the discussion on the distance between buildings, the deviations being sought are actually less than what we had previously identified for you. And we believe that these public benefits are now in proportionate amount to the degree of relief being sought through the Plan Development District application. The last thing I want to briefly mention is that at the last meeting, there was some desire that we actually try to explain and further clarify what this thing looks like. When you drive by the site right now on Palm Canyon Drive, you're seeing a raw, unfinished concrete block wall. That wall was part of the component requirements by the state of California for the pool barrier. The unusual situation here is that the inspector required, where we normally expect to see a 5-foot-high pool barrier, the inspector required that the pool barrier be 5 feet as measured from the top of the pilasters on the adjacent wall at the Billy Reed site. So what that did was it drove the overall height of this perimeter pool barrier wall, which is also the site wall for this project, up to around 8.5, almost 9 feet. And that's why you're seeing it as a height that you see right now. I want to just briefly go through these images that are on your screen. This is the Palm Canyon.
When you do that, would you please also indicate the new buildings or additions? That was one of the requests that the commission made last time, was to understand what was being
what's
added.
New and what's existing.
Yes.
I'm going to go up to the screen then, and I'll walk you through this. You're going to see two sets of these images, and we've set up two sets so that you understand the clarity of what's happening in the landscaping and what's happening with these walls. So this image that you're seeing is looking at the site from Palm Canyon Drive. This is the existing covered porte cochere. This is the existing hotel building. It's a 2-story building with a clay tile mansard roof. This wall that you see here is the wall that many of you have probably seen if you've driven this portion of Palm Canyon. It's a stuccoed wall with portions that have a landscape planter here. This landscape planter, these areas that are designed to look like wood, are actually porcelain tile, and it gives some variation in the texture and the material and the color on this wall. At these points where there are planters, then there's a mesh, if you will, or a grid upon which a vine-type material is proposed to grow upon. This is looking at the same elevation from the other direction. So you were just now looking at it from here. Now you're looking at it more or less from the south edge of the site. Again, this is without the landscaping. The next one, I'll show you the landscaping. We've basically taken the landscaping out here so you get a full impact of what the height of this wall is.
What is the extent of, there's a black paint next to the porcelain tile. How far does that go?
This?
Yes.
This direction?
Yeah, what's the distance?
Approximately 15 feet. It's simply a painted block to give a different sort of, the issue that came up with AAC was this wall seemed very long and stark. And so the notion was break this thing up with some different materials, some different colors, some different textures, so that it doesn't seem to be so long and monotonous. So that's what they were doing with these various things. There's also a slight offset that they've done here in order to also get some variation in the surfacing of this wall. So what you're seeing here, again, is the wall that is basically the barrier or the edge of the outdoor venue space. So behind this wall, what you're seeing here is the retractable canopy that's at the raised stage area where the DJ and other, if it's not a DJ going on, there could be a seating on that level. So you're seeing here just the very bit of the top of the covered canopy over that area. What you're seeing here is the northerly edge of the Billy Reed's parking lot. So now this is the same image you saw previously, but what we've tried to show you here now is there's landscaping material that happens basically between the edge of the sidewalk and their property line. And it also helps to soften and bring some visual interest to that area. I would also note that at the request of the AAC, they have gone back in and they're re-landscaping many other parts of the site where the landscaping has either died, become blighted, overgrown. And here again, the same image that you just saw before, but with the landscaping that's placed in this area brought in so that you can understand how the whole thing has been put together. This is an image, I'm going to skip past this because we've got some newer ones that they've provided me. Okay, so this is the area within the pool deck area. So this is the existing hotel. This is the small building, which is the food service prep or kitchen area. This is the outdoor bar. And then there's a fence with plantings that are here that give basically a visual separation between this area, which is the pool deck area, and this area, which provides access to the hotel room.
Can you show us how that new building is not attached or is attached to the existing building?
Let me see if I can show you in another image. Basically at the roof level, though, it comes over and becomes basically a covered portal through which you can step. I may be able to show it to you in another image. Let me see if I can get through these images and if there's one that does show it more clearly. That's, okay. What you're seeing here now is if you were standing on that area where those hotel rooms are, now you're looking out toward this area is where the pool cabanas are proposed, and then this is one of the outdoor bars. And again, what you're looking at here is this is now looking basically west. So this is the westernmost outdoor bar. This is the raised stage area that would be used for DJs or for additional seating when there is no DJ playing. This is a ramp that basically provides accessibility up to that raised level. Correct. And here again, you see this image which characterizes what's going on with some of these various surfaces and textures. This was the one I hoped Michael would show you, but basically this segment of roof continues over and attaches to the building. Again, here you see the cabanas that are along the north property line. And this is looking at it again from the other direction. So this is the raised DJ booth area. This is one of the outdoor bars that's attached to the security building. That little ramp that you saw goes right up in here. And again, these are the pool cabanas that lay along the edge of the property. And that's the
Questions of staff before we go to the public hearing? And then I have a couple of procedural ones, but if people have substantive, I'm going to start in this direction. Commissioner Kellerstein?
Ken, question on the C1 split zoning and how we normally handle that. That's the westerly part of the site that's the C1 zoning?
That's correct.
Why do we, and the setback on the C1 itself would not require the deviations, right? A regular C1 would not require deviations.
A regular front setback in a C1 zone would be an average of 5 feet.
Okay.
When you have hotels in the C1 zone, they're required to be developed to the R3 standards. That's why you see many of the older hotels set back like that.
Oh, I see. So it's not a question of the fact that it's split zone. It's a question that the C1 zone itself requires the R2 underlying R2 standards. Is that?
It's yes and yes.
Okay.
It is a split zone lot, and that is a requirement. If you look in the zoning code, and you look at the list of permitted uses in the C1 zone, hotels are a permitted use subject to the development standards of the R3 zone.
I gotcha. Now I understand that a little bit better. The only other question that I have is, maybe it's a question for the rest of the commissioners, is that the landscaping along South or North Palm Canyon there with the agaves, it looks like agaves there. It looks a little thin. I don't know if we can get something more lush or something. And maybe it's just my view, or is anybody else? I don't know if anyone else shares it, but it looks like just the.
This is a partial site plan which shows you the general characterization of this area. This is the property line here. So the new buildings are proposed literally on the front property line with some areas of setback. So this area between here and the sidewalk is in the public right-of-way.
Okay.
So they can certainly plant this area, and we will require through the standard landscape ordinance that it has roughly 50% ground cover, live ground cover. But the issue in this area is that we limit this to generally being shrub-like plants, because if the city ever needed to get in there, they don't want to have to be moving monster-sized boulders and things to get at underground utilities that may need to be repaired.
Okay. Maybe nobody else is, I'm still a little concerned about that.
We're not really
okay.
at a discussion point, so
I
I think
understand.
that's important to bring up in discussion. Commissioner Donenfeld.
On the terms and conditions of approval, on PLN 16C, the first phrase, if subwoofers are installed. But if you go back to PLN 20, we have disallowed subwoofers on this project, which I think is a very important feature of this noise plan. So there's a conflict between PLN 16C and PLN 20.
Just to speak, there are a number of those. And I think that's something that we want to go through in detail, piece by piece, because there are a number of conflicts.
Well, if I may, PLN 20 is responding or reflecting the applicant's statement that they would not have subwoofers as part of this sound system. So they made that offer at the last Planning Commission hearing. I brought that in as an actual condition of approval. So the project as proposed will not have subwoofers. And item C on a condition of approval PLN 16 was written with the notion that if they are installed. So that one was a residual condition statement that came out of the mitigation measures. And the way this is now written is that 20 says you won't have subwoofers, and that if you do have subwoofers, you'll put in the sound limiters for that frequency of sound.
Then you either say you can't have subwoofers, or under certain circumstances you can. You can't have it both ways.
I think
and I
what
thought
we
we
would
determined.
I have some language proposed
Okay.
as to how we would deal with that when we get to conditions. Just as a procedural matter, Flynn, when we went through this, we were going through it piece by piece last time with the understanding that we would get all of the conditions back and then approve everything together in the right places. We actually didn't get that back from staff in terms of what we'd suggested for various items, although I think many of us have a pretty good memory of what we proposed. So I think we're going to have to go through these. And just as a condition, I'm concerned that the parking was taken off the table as a variance when some of the conditions that have to do with public benefit were going to be discussed later, and they were going to be part of the whole package. So I think we've got to, do we need to go back and make a motion that we undo the previous approval so that we come back with a full package?
No, I don't think that you need to undo your previous approvals. What I think we can do is, as part of the Plan Development District application, we will include all of those conditions wrapped within that application. The motions that you made on the variance and the conditional use permit were specific to those two items. However, those are incorporated in the overall scheme of the development of the project, which is covered by the Plan Development District. And so as we go through the conditions of approval, we will make sure that they are included as part of the conditions of approval for the Plan Development District.
Okay. So I'm going to let people go through. I think we may want, Commissioner Donenfeld, do you want to go through each of the items you were concerned about in the conditions now, or should we take those up?
Still have to
I think we
public
should take them
comment.
as a group.
Take them up as a
yeah.
group and not do them one by
Still
one.
have public comment too, right?
I still have
Right.
a question of staff.
No, we're still at questions of staff, and we're going down the line. So do you have more questions of
No,
staff?
there were terms and conditions questions, and we can get to those
Okay.
as a group.
Commissioner Hirschbein, did you have questions of staff?
And thank you so much. I know this project's taken a lot of your analytical abilities and time. So
One might call it job security.
thank you very much. So I'm going to add to your job security now.
Or insecurity. Huh?
In terms of the lighting that's proposed for the palm trees, I'm not familiar with, I haven't been out there at night to study what the deficiencies are relative to the other palm trees on Palm Canyon. But my concern would be if we just say, okay, go light those palm trees up, they might be out of character with the rest of the palm trees there. Will you have some?
Oh, we would never let that happen.
You'll have some control over that?
They're going to, if they're going to install, if you approve their installation of palm tree lighting, the palm tree lighting will conform to the city's new
Okay.
standards for
Okay.
palm tree lighting,
Okay,
including
thank
all
you.
the circuiting and LED uses and so on. yeah.
Check that one off.
It will look like
Okay.
all the rest.
Never mind. In terms of the free valet parking on the remote site, will the free part of that valet parking adhere to the dinks in the future as well, or is that something that you'd have to look at when the dinks proposal came up?
Commissioner Hirschbein, that was in what we approved last time.
Yes,
Dinks part of it would
the
have to be
valet,
free.
the free valet parking for the valet service associated with this project would be free.
No, that I got.
And any project that you consider with respect to uses at the Dinks building, which will have to be valet parked, you may at that time choose to require it to also be free valet parking service, but the valet parking service that is associated with any future use at the Dinks building is not part of your consideration today.
So we could not say it has to be free at this point.
It would be best if you considered that at the time that you consider a
Okay.
future use of
Okay.
that building.
Thank you. In terms of percentages of the whole site, just roughly, how much is C1 and how much is R3?
It's about half and half.
Half and half.
If you look through the entire city, the front 200 feet all the way through the city is C1. And then if there is a lot that goes all the way through beyond a 200-foot depth, the rear portions of those lots are either R2 or R3 or R4.
Okay, so I'm trying to restate what you said. So under R3 development standards, there's a 45% requirement for open space, but sometime in the past, they were this building or this development was granted a 41% open space standard, and now we're taking it down first from 45 to 41, and now we're taking it down to 38. Is that what we're saying?
Well, not exactly. What has happened here? This hotel was developed, I believe, in the early '80s. It's the date of this original construction is in the first staff report. I do not know when these open space requirements were brought into the zoning code. As best as I can tell from a review of the original case files when this hotel was developed, there was no mention of percentages of open space. So my surmising is that when this hotel was developed back in the early '80s, there was no requirement for a percentage of open space. So when we stand here today with a project that's considering reducing the open space, we had to say, well, what are we starting with? Mm-hmm. And what we're starting with is 41%. Okay.
But if it were being developed today, it would start with 45%.
That is correct.
Okay. In terms of these new buildings, does the code then specify that as long as the roof structure extends to an existing building, it's part of the same building?
The way that it's written is that buildings shall be considered attached if they are structurally attached. It's a bit of a circular statement the way that it's written in the definitions, but the way that's been interpreted in the 12 or so years that I've been here at the city is that if the buildings are attached at the roof level, then they are considered one building and they are considered attached.
And we didn't get to look at the ticket building, but I'm assuming there's a roof structure that's going to extend over to the existing building as well.
Yes, and I don't know if it will show. Let me get to that slide. Oh, maybe this one.
Can you run through that building for us?
This one?
The ticket building.
Yeah, let me find, I think I have an enlarged plan of it. Okay. So this is the ticketing and security building.
Yes.
The way that this is oriented with the main building is the main part of the hotel is up there.
Yes.
That large existing porte cochere, or that covered place where you enter the building, sits about right there. So when participants or people coming to attend something here or to come here for dinner or whatever, they would walk up the sidewalk, they would walk here. If it's an event that requires tickets, they would purchase their tickets here at this window, and then they would enter the venue at this point. And this is the point where this building is attached to the other building with a covered roof area. So within this building, you have offices, restrooms, locker rooms, storage. This is walk-in storage, I believe, for the bar services, a conference room, workroom storage, and then this is the one of the two bar buildings here. This is then a partial plan of the raised stage area.
And how much of that is added?
All of this is new. All of this is new.
So we don't have any elevations of the new structures?
That's going to be my next question.
Sorry.
But before we get to that question, I'm still looking at the old the plans that we received. I don't know when we received them, but a couple of times ago. They don't indicate any sort of. They don't indicate that. They don't indicate that the roof extends to that building. Will they be resubmitting that document to you, or does that just go straight to the building department with that provision?
This that you're reviewing today is a preliminary PD and the minor architectural. So with any PD, the final PD submission will come before you as well.
And that'll show the roof extending to the.
We'll make
existing
darn
roof.
sure it does.
Okay. And then to Chairwoman Wormuck's question, we don't really see what this building looks like. Is that also going to be part of the final?
Let me see if I can show you. The elevation drawings for these buildings tend to be a bit dry, but let me see if I can get to them. Okay.
What page are you on?
I'm on page A-04. This will be in the, it should be in your packets. Hudson has it?
Yeah, we have it.
All right, let me try to walk you through these. Let's start with the street front. This is the Palm Canyon street front, okay? So when you were looking at the thing where there was some green vines here and green vines here, that area where you were asking about the dark panel is here. This portion of the wall was that white wall, and then these areas were the areas that are porcelain tile that's designed to look like wood. Flipping to the other side, these are the pool cabanas. These are the pool cabanas here. This is the wall that is the dividing wall between this property and Billy Reed's. And then this is the actual kitchen building that is attached to the existing hotel. This one, which kind of doesn't say anything, but is basically looking at the property from the other side. So this is looking at it from the Billy Reed's parking lot. This is the ticketing building. When I mentioned to you there's a window where you pick up your tickets and then you enter the venue here. This is how you go. You come in here, you get your ticket, you walk into the venue. If you're thirsty, you stop here at the bar, and then you move into wherever you're going to sit. If you're coming here to on an evening when there is no DJ, they can walk you up this ramp, and there would be some seating up here. If there's a venue in which there is a DJ, then this area serves as the Rage's DJ stage. This is the north elevation, which there really is nothing happening on most of these buildings. They're very utilitarian. But this is basically a stucco-clad building. These are roof-mounted mechanical equipment units that are screened to match the existing building and the new building. This would be the elevation. If you recall, I showed you that ramp in one of those elevations. This is the ramp that gets you up to the sound stage here. And so this is looking at the back side of the security building. Palm Canyon would be out here, okay? This you saw just a glimpse of. This is where the buildings connect at this point. This is the devising wall with the adjacent property. These are relatively insignificant, but these are your bar. This is your freestanding bar that if you go to site plan again, just to orient you, this is the security building, the bar, the race stage area. This is the point at which you come through, get your ticket, go into the venue. This is the existing porte cochere. This is the freestanding bar that you saw in the renderings. This is the area where that fences of landscaping that separates the rooms from the event space. This is the kitchen building, and that's attached to the main building here. This footprint of this rectangle and this rectangle represent the existing hotel, and this portion here inside the existing hotel is a previously used laundry area that's getting gutted to provide for the required additional toilets for the outdoor venue space. So this is kind of what you have standing there today, albeit with a new pool, and this is what's proposed.
Thank you.
I hate to interject this at this time because we're talking about job security for Mr. Lyon. I don't know how my fellow commissioners feel, but I don't feel we have enough information here. The elevations are not good, and I'm not an architect, and even I can see my architect fellow commissioners are shaking their head. We've got some issues with terms and conditions which don't really reflect the discussion we had the prior meeting 2 weeks ago. I think we should continue this. I know that the applicant is not going to be happy about it, but this is really an important project that we need to understand totally and completely, and I just don't feel we have the information adequately sufficient to do that today.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I think I was the one that requested last time some additional information about the new buildings. And you know, we have some additional 3D renderings, which are lovely, but they really don't describe the building. And I'm looking at the very, I don't know the term you use, Ken, but I thought it was quite kind, sparse drawings for the buildings. And, you know, these are really minimal buildings, and I think how they're handled, how the elevations are handled is really important. And on a couple of the sections, I've noticed rooftop mechanical and ducting and so forth. And you mentioned that they'll be screened, but these are fairly low buildings, and that screen, and I think there'll probably be quite a bit of it because there is a kitchen, are going to have a major impact on what these buildings look like. So I would, for one, need to see much more complete elevations. And if the buildings are going to be connected to the existing buildings, we need to see that, what the nature of that connection is. I think whoever the project architect is, RSHA, they really need to provide much stronger documentation because these drawings are not doing this project a service at all. It's just the opposite.
Madam Chair, if I may, I want to just remind the Commission, this is a preliminary PD. And when you do see a preliminary PD, you aren't looking at all the final details of architecture and site planning. So you're dealing with what are very, very simple box-like buildings to begin with. But there's...
Member, I think that what you're hearing is a fairly unanimous feeling on the Commission about the material that's before us in terms of sufficiency. So where you may think it's preliminary, we're looking at something where we've done preliminary PDs before and they come back to us and we hadn't looked at them sufficiently in the beginning to make sure that we were comfortable with what was going to come back. So I'm just, I'm at least going to say that I'm completely in support of what Commissioner Hudson and Donenfeld have raised.
May I add that you know, these are not minor details in my mind. These are major things that may truly affect the project outcome. And you know, as Chair mentioned, too often we've had projects come back for the final and they're just not what we wanted to see. So now's the time to clarify some of these.
Commissioner Hirschbein?
Yeah. If I was being asked to approve this design for these modest little buildings at this point, I'd have to say no. I mean, I'm going to be very kind of judgmental. They're sort of mean little buildings. There's nothing architectural about them. They need a little bit of gusto, and I'm not seeing any of the gusto there. And that's what I'd be looking for. I don't have to have a set of working drawings to approve it. I just have to see it looking better and looking as they're going to propose it to be, i.e. the overhang and so forth. But if you look at that, and plus you can't even read it. I mean, I was trying to read that, I was trying to read this, I was trying to read this site plan. You can't read it. But what I can read, I don't like. I was just going to one of those elevations where that little tiny window is where you're going to be buying tickets. That's just there's nothing interesting or elegant or architectural or welcoming about that facade. It's just this little hole in a stucco wall.
Yeah,
and it needs embellishment, or it needs to be designed in such a way that the building itself has the elegance and the interest inherent in it. But I don't know that, or what I do know about it, it doesn't have that. So I would support, moving it to a date certain or tabling it until they can come back, whatever that is.
I think we'll try and figure out exactly how we handle it. I think we have several levels of things that we're looking at. We've got we have to go back to the conditions in terms of noise, taking the parking out of the public benefit, which I think the parking variance is part of the thing that needs to go into public benefit. noise conditions, parking conditions. We have to look at the PD issues and the design issues. So I can open the public hearing and then allow the commission to have comments on each of those issues to give some direction. Is that how you'd like me to handle it, Flynn?
Yes, I think it would be appropriate to open the public hearing.
I don't think we're going to get to approval today, but at this point, what I will do is open the public hearing and then try and go through each of the issues on a comment basis as a part of a motion to continue. So at this point, the public hearing is open. I think the applicant had before 10 minutes and rebuttals, so I think anyone who comes before us has 3 minutes, unless there are questions. So does anybody wish to comment? Seeing no members of the public who wish to comment, the public hearing is closed. Going through these issues, why don't I first take comments on the design issues, and I would do it 2 ways: what you would like to see, and also the mentioning both the frontage and the rear of the building, as well as the buildings themselves. And maybe I'll start at the architectural end of this this row, and
I'll leave the discussion to Commissioners Hirschbein and Hudson.
Okay, I'd like to be as positive and helpful to the applicant as possible. So my comments will be geared towards that. And in terms of the design, I think RGA, Ron Gregory's landscape firm, always does, in my mind, personal opinion, very good work. There's a sense of detail and quality to it. The images of the front wall, initially they're a bit hard to understand, but I can appreciate sort of the care that's being given to that front wall. And I'd like to see, personally, that amount of care given to the facades of these little buildings. And I think it can be done in very creative ways. I rather like the fact that the new construction is quite a contrast to the, I'll just call it sort of Spanish design with the clay tile mansard roof. And I think Chair just mentioned also something interesting in my mind. What does this building really look like from Indian Canyon, both in terms of landscape? Mention was made, Ken made a mention that the applicant will be augmenting the additional or existing landscape because of conditions. I'd like to see what that looks like. I'd like to see what the back side of the kitchen building looks like. But I think my major comment, as I said, we need to see a lot. I think Commissioner Hirschbein said this quite well, that these are small buildings, but with little buildings, placement of windows or doorways can make a big difference. And I say this because I think the applicant, in my mind, has an interesting building or a business model here about what they want to do and the quality that they want to achieve. And I don't think the architecture of the buildings is supporting that. And it's a matter, it doesn't need elaborate three-dimensional drawings in my mind. It needs just elevation drawings and sections that can be read by a layman, and they're not construction documents. They're illustrative documents that show where materials are, what the colors are. And then I think we need to see a bit more about if these buildings are attaching to the existing, what does that attachment look like, just aesthetically? Is it stucco on stucco, or is it, metal to stucco? I think, the project architect could probably put together some images fairly quickly, because again, I don't view them as complex three-dimensional documents. I think those are my major comments or suggestions.
Commissioner Hirschbein?
Yes, I'd agree with everything Commissioner Hudson said, especially about the wall. I think the wall facing Palm Canyon is pretty nice, from what I can tell. I'm also very happy with the landscaping. I think it's appropriate to that kind of modern geometric quality to the wall. So there has been some attention lavished on that area, which needs to be lavished on those other two little buildings as well, particularly as they relate to what the public sees, which I'm a little unclear of. I guess there's this kind of a space between the ticket building and the front wall that is not seen. Does that building stick up above the wall? I'm kind of unclear on that.
Are you talking about the security ticketing building?
Yeah, it's like right at the wall.
The wall that you see along Palm Canyon is the front wall of that building.
Okay, perfect. Okay. And so let's see what the rest of that building looks like as it faces the parking entrance, as well as it faces the pedestrian entrance into the venue, the entertainment area. And I'd like to see what that's going to look like. And I'd also like to see, I'd like to have the AAC review it before we get to it.
The AAC has reviewed
But
this.
they haven't seen these buildings. They don't know what these buildings look like, because we don't know what these buildings look like. And I'd like the AAC to have a look at what they're going to look like. That's all I have.
Just, I have a couple of comments in there regarding, I agree with everything you said about the buildings. I think that we need to see the attachments. I like the idea that they're modern and that they don't mimic what's existing there. As I look at the front, I'm a little bit struck. I'm concerned about the black paint and think possibly that needs to be a material for a difference, maybe an Ipe, maybe something else, rather than just black paint. It's a very important frontage. The orange marker is a little I know it relates back to the building, but I think there could be a better monument than the existing marker, and the orange color doesn't fit with the new wall. I would like to see landscape on both sides of the building, and I'd like to see a landscape plan and rear elevations for Indian Canyon, because that's as important an entrance to us as, especially with new construction going on across the street. I think the improvement of the Indian Canyon site is really important. So in terms of the major, is it major architectural that we're looking at?
Minor.
Minor, in terms of the minor architectural, those are things that I'd like to see come back to us. So does anybody else have comments on the architecture? Do you agree with me on the black paint?
It is difficult to tell, but if you go to page SP1 in the original package.
I don't know if I can find.
Let me show
I
you.
have it up on the boards here for you,
SP1.
on the screen.
Right, but I still might like to see a material, a different material than just black paint at that point. I understand that it's set back, but it's, I think that the new frontage on the building is really important. And that was the one item of it. The other is the question about the sound transmission through the mesh. There was a green mesh with plants in front of it, and whether that's sufficient to keep sound back.
The mesh is in
Is
front
there
of
a
a
wall
masonry wall. Yeah, it's a solid masonry wall behind
Then
the
it's
mesh.
perfect. Yeah, if it's softening the wall, it's fine. I was afraid
It was there to
just.
add additional texture and contrast and
Yeah.
to make something that the plants could crawl up.
No, I think that's fine, but I would like to understand the rest and see the rest of the project and hope that it's a more modern architecture that goes with the pool area. On another item, I'm not quite sure why the raised podium needs to be as high as it is. and I know they've gone ahead and started building it, but that would be a question that I would have as to, is that elevation appropriate? I'm just worried about noise going up, so. Okay, going from that to the other conditions, should we go through the items in the conditions that we had looked at last time? And I went through and made suggestions. I don't know if anybody else wants to. I could start.
Madam Chair, would it be helpful for me to go through my notes from the conditions last time and identify how Ken has incorporated those into the new conditions?
No, I think if we miss what he's incorporated, I think it would have been helpful to have those in front of us, but I think we can go through it this way. The project description, I think, needs to identify the off-site parking, and it only identifies amplified as opposed to ambient soundstage, so that's an administrative one. In administrative 6...
Excuse me, could you just hold for just a moment so we can get that down?
What was described to us was a soft, a project with soft music, which the music would be completely contained within the area, and that a good portion of the music would be ambient as opposed to amplified. So I think the project description should be a little more accurate.
And then you said that you also wanted it to include the off-site parking?
The off-site, that, yeah, within the project is the fact that the parking for the restaurant, bar, music venue is off-site. Under administrative 6, I think we wanted to include off-site parking for maintenance and repair, so that they're required to maintain that lot. The time limit on approval, right now, I'm not sure if we have a limit on approval of 2 years and 2 years. Do we have that yet, Flynn, or is that?
This is the standard language from the zoning code. So 2 years for the plan development district, and then the conditional use permit is also 2 years.
Under administrative 8, for the noise issues, I think we should allow for subsequent, the language is accurate for what we did last time, but I think we should allow for subsequent approvals at the Planning Commission's request if there is excessive noise or other conditions coming out of the project. So,
did we agree, or did we finally decide that it did not make sense at the appropriate time when we're checking out impacts, measuring noise from other receiving sites?
Let's get to that.
Oh, okay.
Because I think we wanted that, and Nicole didn't. The cause no disturbance, administrative 12, we shared a concern with the neighborhood that they also monitor that their guests at the entertainment restaurant and music venue not park in adjacent parking structures, so that be included in administrative 12. No parking, just that they monitor for people parking in the neighborhood and adjacent parking lots, like parking across at Rick's. Under administrative 13, grounds for revocation would also be not, I guess, the conditions of approval, including the noise conditions of approval, and that's probably understood. Planning condition number 1, the lighting, some of the lighting in the pictures that's in front of us is uplighting that would light the night sky, and generally we don't, how do we handle that? Because the city's light ordinances require downlighting, but a lot of the strung lighting that goes across is lighting that would light up the night sky.
The city's outdoor lighting ordinance addresses landscape lighting as an exemption. So when you look at the uplights that the city has in the palm trees, and if you look around the many different projects around the city, the Morrison, the Soul Project, and other multifamily projects, you see landscape lighting that's usually lighting up the trunks of trees. That type of lighting is typically not included within the outdoor lighting ordinance.
And is the strung lighting, the lighting that's going, it's that kind of lighting?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
It's the lighting that Flynn's showing you.
Those are the types of lights that you would see at El Mirasol in the outdoor courtyard, El Mirasol North, the little strings of Tivoli lights.
Right. As long as they're, I think to look at it and see that the lighting is contained within the site.
Sure.
Conditions for AAC approval. I heard from one of our commissioners that they'd like the AAC to go back and take a look at the buildings themselves. I'm wondering if people think that's necessary. I'm not sure that I do.
Why not? Because I agree with... Could it be put on the next agenda for AAC?
They'd have to produce the drawings.
Oh, I see. They still have to produce the drawings.
Well, if we send it back and let's talk about that. Doug, what do you think on that?
Just as part of a process or a protocol, that's what we typically do.
So then we will, and then then this condition, planning condition 4.
And again, if this were just minor little details, I don't think it would be necessary, but these are not minor little
details. Okay. So planning condition 4 would contain the look at the AAC again on the buildings and the landscape. Planning condition 5, is Tuckwitz Canyon Way a mistake here?
No, the way that ordinance is written is it deals with both the street trees on Tuckwitz and the street trees on Palm Canyon.
So we're not requiring anything that has to do with street trees on Tuckwitz?
No.
Okay. Under remote parking 15, it has language about a discotheque. I don't think we've really defined this as a discotheque at any point in time.
Those are terminologies directly quoted from the parking ordinance, but I can pull that out.
Thank you. And then when we get to...
I have a comment regarding the parking in this. Would it be under this?
Yeah.
In 16, 15?
Let me finish these and then let you come back. I think we should move planning condition 21 up here so that all of the parking conditions are contained in one area, and that was the valet parking service be provided at no charge from the owner by the owner, so that it would become item I.
Minor technicality, but somebody could be driving a car and not be the owner. So, I mean, it's a little bit of
so hold on.
Driver, I guess, but
no charge to the vehicle, right? Well, they could be renting the car, so at no charge to the vehicle operator. Under G, I do believe that the loss, and I'm not sure where the lease provisions are, but the loss of the lease for the off-street parking location should be a grounds for the revocation of the CUP. And a J, that hotel guests may not be parked in the off-site location, that the on-site parking should be reserved for hotel guests, except if there is excess parking based on occupancy.
Could you repeat that?
Yeah, it's that the hotel guests, the guests of the hotel, people who are renting rooms, shall not be parked in the off-site location, and that the parking on-site, the hotel parking, is reserved for hotel guests, except that in the event that the hotel is not occupied and there's excess parking, that excess could be used for the restaurant and music venue guests.
Got it. Thank you.
That's what I had on parking. Did you have additional things on parking?
Just a question of staff. For dinks, and maybe this is something for the future when it's the use is actually coming forward, but when there aren't events occurring at Infusion, couldn't dinks just be self-parked?
Theoretically, yes.
Is there some way to put that in as a condition, or?
Not. My concern with that is if you're allowing them to potentially have events every night until midnight, there's always the potential that this will be utilized. And so it has to be reserved for this use.
Yeah. Theoretically, you can do that, but the problem you're going to run into, and I would recommend that you keep it as valet and not talk about having that 2080 lot going into self-park, because if 2 or 3 people self-park their cars there and then they decide to go somewhere else, and all of a sudden the site now needs to be opened up for valet parking, you've got locked cars there that are blocking all of your valet parking. It's not going to work that way.
But the lease is held by the same owner, the same property.
It doesn't matter. If you've got guests going to Dinks that are parked, and then they decide to go down the street to Toucans, and they leave their car in that lot, and now the valet people need to get that lot open for an evening event for the Infusion Beach, you now have visitor cars that are locked and parked in spaces where you need those spaces open for the valet parkers to park both buildings.
But the owner would know that. The owner would know that during the day that there's an event in the evening and they would require valet parking.
You guys can condition this how you want, but you will run into a problem between trying to have self-park and valet park in that same lot for different uses in different buildings.
I don't think there's support for what you're trying to go for.
Actually,
as I'm looking around.
I do rather support
you do?
Commissioner Maruzzi's comment. I've always been sort of bewildered as, okay, I would doubt that events are going to be occurring every night. I guess my basic statement is, what triggers having to have valet parking? Certainly it's not going to be every day, all day long. I know it's an operational thing, but I agree personally that there may be situations where valet is not necessary for Dinks, for whatever use in the future Dinks becomes. I think it's overly cumbersome to expect to have valet service, basically 24/7.
I agree.
Commissioner Hirschbein.
I can see both sides. I think the problem is that it's an operational issue. We're planning commissioners. How do you make sure that our intended outcome is going to be not enforced, but just used moving forward 6 months, 5 years, whatever down the line? It's just a really hard thing to try to write in operational rules that are that specific and that allow for flexibility into a planning document. And so I'm inclined to keep it the way it is. And maybe I'm speaking out of school here, but I think over time, it'll tend to sort itself out. And the real problem is we don't want cars parking in the neighborhood. That's the real problem. So we have built-in ways to deal with that other than this valet parking. And if sometime in the future, you guys close your ears now, but if sometime in the future they choose to let Dinks open for breakfast without valet parking until noon or something, and we don't know about it, but it's not impacting the parking, then I think that's what might happen. But I think to try to write those kind of operational rules into a planning document, we're going to go into a deep hole and not be able to word it properly and maybe lock them into unintended consequences. I just think that might be a problem. But I see your point. I just don't see how you deal with it in this.
It seems to me that logistically it would be very, very hard to monitor the self-parking element of this proposal because this is a very fine-tuned, stacked valet parking concept with two commercial users. Very often, once people are given the liberty of self-parking for whatever brief period of time that might be, you're likely to run into some real problems with cars that don't go away, the cars that stay there. You try to open up, and they can't support the off-site parking they need for their guests. I think until we live with this for a while, I think having a strict rule that everything is valet parked makes a lot of sense.
And once we can review how this happens, but at that point, Dinks may not be open, so that periodic reviews of that make sense. It just, I don't know how they're going to do it and if they're intending to wall off half of the parking lot for valet and leave the other half open. The other item I think we requested in relationship to parking in the neighborhood was that the applicant queue cars for valet into the interior of the site, and that isn't in the conditions, but it should be in the conditions. That's in your notes, right? And Flynn, is there anything else we haven't touched on parking that's in your notes?
Let's see, I was just going to say that stacking for valet shall occur within the parking lot, shall not extend out into the street areas. That was one of the things that unfortunately we had missed. I think relative to parking, that's the only thing I saw that was not in there. And the rest of the conditions were relative to the conditional use permit and noise.
I have a question. I just thought of this. Maybe we covered it and I slipped by me, but when patrons are leaving the venue, do they walk back to the Dinks site?
No,
or do they pick their car up?
The car is brought back.
Brings it. Do we know where they stack? They stack on the hotel site, right?
With that condition, they would be required to stack within the hotel site.
Okay. Both drop off
and pick up, exactly.
So that they're not stacking into the street. Okay, noise attenuation issues. So parking we've covered. The only other thing on parking that I would have, and it's not in this, is parking is the variance on parking is a part of the PD, and it's one of the accommodations we're making as a part of the PD, so that I think I want to leave it open that we consider that the fact that we've given a variance on parking when we look at public benefit. And we don't have public benefit in this, but we'll do that as the last item, just sort of discussions as to what we need and where we may go with that. The first item, as I get into noise, is we asked for both a long-term monitoring station and under B, it was not as an alternative, but additionally a permanent noise monitoring solution described in addition to basically in addition to the permanent noise monitoring solution, a sound limiter would be installed as part of the project sound system, so we asked for both. And I think that can be handled by changing as an alternative to the word additionally and then just changing the verbiage a little bit. When we get to number C, following along, a sound system shall not employ subwoofers. And then we said, additionally, the applicant is to install a low-frequency sound limiter. So we had asked for both of those conditions, no subwoofers and the sound limiter regarding bass noises. And if there's anything else in PL 20, we want to add the items that are in PL 20, which is that the limiter associated with the sound system shall be preset, and the owner-operator of the system shall not have the ability to override or bypass such limiters. And that should all be in PL 16, so that everything in PL 16 relates to noise and that it's not in two different parts of the sets of conditions, so that when the applicant reads it or code enforcement reads it, they see it all in the same place. This is, and I don't know if people feel that this describes the system that they had talked about, which is, I thought there might be some description of the system as being a system that controlled the sound so that it was contained within the property and that it'd be designed to do that. And this list, what? No, she said they could, that they were designing it. They were designing it in such a way that most of the sound would be contained in the property by the ways that, right, that they would direct the speakers to the extent possible contain the sound within the property and maybe describe the system that they were intending to use. And as we get to hours of operation, I didn't remember that we agreed till 2 a.m. from Sunday to Thursday. I thought we were at 12, but I could be wrong in that.
The what?
This is music.
Under hours? Oh, okay.
Flynn, what do you have on that?
In my
I
notes,
had different memories, but it could just be that I'm more cautious.
just double check here just one moment. I had in my notes that food service was discontinued at 12 a.m. Let's see. Sunday through Thursday, I had in my notes 9 a.m. to 12 a.m. food service. Friday and Saturday until 2 a.m. and pool access until 2 a.m.
But under music, it says Sunday through Thursday, ambient sound level 11 a.m. to 2 a.m.
So if we have restaurant open till 12, Sunday through Thursday, and bar is open to 12, why would we have music open till 2? I don't believe we should. And I don't believe that's what we agreed to. I think giving it till 12 is sufficient. You don't want music past the bar. You want people to go home.
Although it is ambient music.
It is ambient music.
Yeah, but we don't even know what that means.
Well, we've defined it.
But I think that limitation that bar and food should go with music.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And PL number 19, we had an LP should be required for any and all special events proposed at the subject site, period. And then even if the idea was that if it was a special event, even if it didn't exclude 210 occupants, they still needed a LUP for a special event. So if they were doing, I'm not sure what they would be doing, but.
We limit the number of special events?
No, we didn't limit the number of special events. We could, yes.
What defines a special event?
Over 210 people.
Is it over 210, or is it you're doing a rock and roll party, a themed rock and roll party with, well, if you came in with a land use permit asking for it.
What would they be at? I mean, what?
I'm just asking.
A rock and roll party, as long as it conformed to all the other requirements, wouldn't need to go through a land use permit.
Only if they wanted music past. So is it special event is just more than 210? Is that what you think is correct?
Yes, because that way you have a threshold to define what is a special event versus what is standard operations.
Okay.
And I think we were writing it with the notion of trying to address parking impacts.
Yeah.
And so they would address parking and any other addressing parking noise. So they would, they'll include acceptable provisions for off-street parking and noise and traffic.
Does Planning Commission review land use permits, or is that
No,
staff? That's just staff.
Okay. And is it typical to limit the number of land use permits?
We don't currently have any that I believe are limited in the code in terms of the number of times per year. But that is something that you may consider as a discretionary approval.
Does anybody have a feeling or thought about that?
I don't want to put that many limitations on what they do. They need some flexibility. I don't think they should have to run to City Hall every time they want to do, something that's, I don't know. They have to do it if it's over 210 people, regardless.
I would assume that as long as Dinks isn't in operation and they have the lease, they might be able to do something with extra parking on the other 69 spaces. So that I think they might be able to get a parking accommodation for something special. Coachella. That's really what I'm thinking is Coachella.
My question is, when a land use permit application is made, typically what are the criteria you would consider in whether to allow the LUP?
In terms of review of land use permits, we look at, for example, in these types of situations, the number of attendees, where are those individuals going to park, what are the hours of operation. Here it's kind of unique in that the hours of operation would be limited by your conditional use permit already. We would look at noise, we would look at impacts to adjacent properties. So basically using the standard criteria that we have for conditional use permits, we typically apply those to land use permits as well.
It seems to me if we are secure in the criteria we're setting forth in the conditions regarding noise and monitoring and levels, we ought to not incur into their business plan to the extent that we limit how many special events they can have during a year. In our review process in 6 months and a year, we'll see what's going on and how it's been working, and we can maybe address that later on, but I would hate to put any sort of restriction since they do have to go through a regulatory review that will look at the kinds of issues that we're concerned about.
And just going back to noise, I did leave one out because there was a pretty strong feeling that we should have some site monitoring for noise in off-site locations. And I think baselines could be set up for that if there are noise complaints, say there are noise complaints up the mountain, that we could choose places for baseline.
The way that was described in the study session, I believe, was that it's really difficult to get accurate readings because of any kind of ambient noise, be it a car passing by or a motorcycle. or another event?
Yeah, I've just done that, though. I mean, we've just done it where we were able to measure on a concert night at the edges of a property that was holding the concert, and then measure within the neighborhood a quarter to a half mile away and get. It was measured with noise equipment by the police department and Golden Voice.
But that's that's in the Ascena area, correct?
Yeah.
Which there isn't that much going on there in relation to what's going on in the area that this building is. The sound expert made it pretty clear that she didn't think it was possible to do it fairly.
The only question is if you end up with noise complaints coming off of the mountain the way we did with Hacienda, it may be important to allow in the periodic reviews, if in the event that we get significant complaints, setting up some kind of a monitoring in the neighborhoods of the complaint.
What does staff think about that?
Yeah, here's what I might recommend is that at the 6-month or 12-month review, one of the things that we will request is we'll pull any complaints, any calls for service related to noise. So we'll use that as a basis for the review in 6 months or 12 months. Based on that review, you may wish to then perhaps do another survey. But what I would do is just recommend that you leave that open so that in your 6-month or 12-month review, you can look at the complaints, and then from there, you can require additional monitoring at that point in time. I don't think you need to specify that
I
here.
agree with that, but can we put that into the review?
What we might say is that additional monitoring may be required based on the review.
I think that covers everything we need.
Site monitoring, I think. I don't know what the term of art is. But there's off-site monitoring.
Off-site monitoring. I don't think I had any comments on the fire department conditions. I think once we get to public benefit, and maybe we should have it. Okay, we'll go through that. Once we get to public benefit, we may want to begin. I guess one question is why the sidewalk issue, especially at the property, is not an engineering condition, that if there are any problems with the sidewalks, that should be a standard fixed condition.
If you look at administrative condition number 6, it talks about maintaining and repairing the improvements, including sidewalks, bikeways, parking areas, landscape irrigation.
The question is, does it include the off-site area that extends from the site up to Via Escuela? That was a little confusing in the condition. Is there an off-site condition there that they would improve that sidewalk all the way up to Via Escuela, as well as the lighting of the trees?
Generally, there are certain triggers that allow the engineering department to impose conditions. In this case, you'll note there are no engineering conditions in this set of conditions of approval. The trigger for engineering conditions is the addition of 10%. Is that correct? On commercial projects, if there's an increase of 10% or more of the square footage of the facility, then engineering has the right to impose conditions. In this case, this project did not reach that threshold, and so by ordinance, the city does not have the authority to impose engineering conditions.
On a discretionary basis, can we ask the engineering department to look at things that might, on the site itself, need correction, including like the slopes of the driveways? I think that's we're looking at a discretionary approval here. So I'm asking.
I think that in general, whenever you're looking at a project in which there are conditions being imposed, those are discretionary actions. So we're somewhat speaking one and the same. The issue of an existing site, for example, if you were somewhere in the central part of the city and you have sidewalks or broken curbs, that project, now normally you would have a project with a brand new building that would of course allow those kind of conditions to be brought in. But if you're dealing with an existing building and the project is for example, a renovation and installation of a cocktail lounge in an existing building, there would be no engineering conditions in that case either, even though there may be deferred maintenance issues in the city's right-of-way. Am I characterizing that correct?
But I just going there, one of the things I wanted to ask as we get to we're not at public benefit yet, but it seems to me like we can ask engineering if there are any deficiencies in things like sidewalks.
We can prepare a list of deficiencies within the project site and the frontage improvements along the project site.
I think that's something that we would like to ask you. I would like to ask you to do. I don't know if I have support.
I agree with that, but I'd also like you to take a look at the frontage on Indian Canyon as well. I don't know what the condition of the sidewalks are.
I looked at them today and I couldn't tell. I mean, I did ask and was told that there were some sloping problems. And it would be good when we get to public benefit to get a list of the deficiencies on sidewalks and improvements going down to Via Escuela and maybe on Via Escuela, because the staff who's going to be parking cars is going to have
running
to be,
back.
They're going to be running that, or they're going to be running Indian,
And
so
Indian
that we should
Canyon
know.
as well. Indian Canyon as well.
Yes, so we should ask for a list of deficiencies.
As far as the lighting of those palm trees, have we noted that there's a deficiency there, or that was just kind of thrown out there?
That wasn't noted as a deficiency from engineering. However, we are south of the project, much further south in the main business district of Palm Canyon. We are doing a Measure J project to go through the electrical and uplighting for the trees. And that project is underway. We anticipate that any improvements done on this project will meet the specifications of the city project.
Great, thank you.
So possibly also going through what you were looking at and giving us a list of how many trees that would be and what the anticipated cost of that would be if you're doing the Measure J project.
We don't have costs for the Measure J project as of yet, but we will come up with a list of improvements that would be similar to what we're doing.
I've been looking at costs of similar fixtures for a different area of the city, so those numbers, we can probably get those numbers too. You had questions on the rest of the
Public benefit?
the fire department.
No, you didn't.
Okay.
Mine are all on public benefit.
Oh, public benefit. Okay. So going to public benefit, and again, we're talking about things we would like to get for people here. Are there items that we would like to see and think about as public benefit?
I have an earlier question in the public benefit process. The applicant is proposing that the project itself is a public benefit, and I know that is contradictory to the policy that we proposed with the PD revisions. Flynn, are those in effect now, or are they something that we have the discretion to apply? Or what's the status of that?
The policy has not yet been modified or codified, so we're working with the existing policy as it currently stands.
Flynn, when this went to council, didn't they reject a city council proposal that the recommendations allow public benefit, the project to be public benefit in?
They qualified it that in true cases of blight, that it could still be considered as a public benefit. But again, we haven't formally adopted that in the code yet.
I thought they didn't accept those recommendations.
Not as proposed by Councilmember Mills, but
Right.
they did note that in extreme cases of blight, that it could be considered as a public benefit.
Then we should probably discuss whether there is blight here or not. It just,
It's no blight.
no?
I can't imagine. Does anybody think there's blight here? No.
Okay, well, that's the decision in that, in my mind, says we're heading towards a direction that there's no public benefit from the project itself, and we have some discretion in making those findings.
And then
The old ordinance as well.
And then in terms of what we can require, the quantification, I actually think that allowing the mitigation on the parking and allowing them to more than double the number of people who can come into the restaurant music venue by allowing a variance on parking is something that we should also look at as potentially requiring a public benefit mitigation.
But isn't the public benefit requirement only attaching to the PDD portion of this?
But the PDD encompasses this.
Well, the remote parking is a variance.
There wouldn't be a variance without the PDD. I think they're interrelated.
For purposes of public benefit?
Yes. The conditions will be against the whole project.
I think that the variance addressed the issue of distance, and I think that the PD addressed the issue of 100% valet.
And use. So the PD addresses the question of use. I mean, we've got a package that's, again, for me, we're allowing a use that we wouldn't have allowed if we didn't we allowed the off-site parking in part to allow them to have this use. And the use is an intensification, a significant intensification of the use of the property. Yep.
So I'm just looking at proportionality.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not separating from the variances and entitlements that they've asked for, but the whole project. And my opinion is that if they're going to upgrade the palm tree lighting to be in conformance with what the city's proposing for the downtown district with Measure J funds, and they're going to redo the sidewalk at a minimum along Palm Canyon between their site, between Billy Reed's and the corner of Via Escuela, and possibly after engineering looks at it, adding on the sidewalk along Indian Canyon and possibly Via Escuela, I feel that that's adequately proportional to what they're asking, even if you do include all the other entitlements that they're seeking other than the PDD. So I would support that as a public benefit.
I'm no expert, but I did walk the sidewalks along Palm Canyon all the way up to Dinks from the site. The sidewalks are in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
They really are. There isn't much to do on those sidewalks. There's a little bit of filling in here and there. So I don't think a commitment to do sidewalks is a very significant commitment at all. So we're really talking about lighting. Now, I can't speak to the Indian Canyon side. I didn't walk the Indian Canyon side, and there may be more. But quite frankly, I don't think it's enough.
Yeah,
Given the nature of this we're making a lot of exceptions on this property, and it seems to me the purpose of the public benefit is that the applicant recognizes that and the city gets some benefit from it.
And I looked at that's why I wanted a report on the sidewalks, because I looked at them from all three sides, and I didn't even see cracks. Maybe there was sloping issues, but I didn't see any cracks. They looked pretty good, so I didn't think we were getting anything for the city. And possibly we look at that, and if we don't do that, we either think about the lighting or we think about some park improvements in a nearby park.
I think the lighting is questionable, because I think somebody mentioned, that this one section of Palm Canyon would stand out then. And it was mentioned, okay, improve pedestrian safety up to the Dink site, and yet we're saying that it's all valet parking anyway. So They're sort of, you know, I just don't even think the lighting, it's just not well thought out. So I think, you know, either we go to the list, sort of the wish list of projects in the city, or we decide of another set of improvement criteria for the neighborhood or for the adjacent street
And we
frontages.
had the wish list, and then I actually asked people who are working on the Chino Cone for a list of improvements, because that I thought was the nearest park space. And the city got that, but maybe we could consider that for the next time as well. And what things Flynn's comfortable with are adjacent enough to the property that we could add, we could look at.
I still think that the Via Escuela signal, if it could be accelerated, or I don't know what its status is, because we didn't really quite confirm it, that would be the most important thing we could look at.
But it's paid for, isn't it?
That's correct.
If it's fully paid for and it's going to happen, yeah, they could still make a contribution to it.
The project is currently underway in the design phase. It'll be going out to construction fairly soon, within this fiscal year. It is a fully funded project at this point.
Well, but even if it's fully funded, some contribution to it would save the city some capital dollars.
Just muddles the
Yeah, it muddles it.
and I think it sets a bad precedent as well.
So I think what we're looking at is we're still looking at public benefit for the next time this comes back. Does that sound right to people?
And did you, when you spoke to the applicant in the interim during the last 2 weeks, did you present them with a list of the public benefit opportunities that might be available that the city's put together?
Yes, the list that was discussed at last meeting was shared with them.
And their reaction to it?
They...
Or I guess they're here, I shouldn't really, I can ask our applicant here.
How did the new sidewalk come up? I mean, was that something staff or engineering asked for? Because I'll admit I didn't look at it carefully.
It was mentioned at the last meeting.
But by who?
I think Commissioner Hudson looked, you mentioned something at looking at trees, sidewalks, things that were adjacent to the building.
Yeah, it was a whole sort of, you know, neighborhood improvement.
I'm asking at the staff level, how did it come up? Was it just a reaction to what Commissioner Hudson said, or did somebody go out and say, oh, this sidewalk does need replacing, or we just threw something out there, hope it's stuck? How did the process
I think that
go?
the discussion of the sidewalk as a proposed public benefit came from the applicant listening to the commissioner's comments at the last meeting.
In addition, the driveway approaches are not ADA standard, up to current ADA standards. Under a new project, we would require those to be replaced, the driveway to be replaced.
Is it appropriate to ask the client or the applicant what their reaction was to the list? Since they saw the list? Apparently it is. So I'd like to hear, what was your reaction to the list of possible benefits that the city provided?
Yes, in the area on the north end. That was the reaction.
Thank you.
So then at that point in time, I proposed sidewalks. And there is no lighting on that end of town. There are no street lamps over there. So there's a deficiency in lighting. And the decorative lighting turns off at 3 a.m. So it's actually incredibly dark over there. So from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., it's a public safety hazard. So that's one of the things I'd brought up to the city in previous conversations with the city. So I immediately went to lighting because I think that's an important public benefit because of the safety issues. Between Dinks and between Billy Reed's and such, there's just no lighting over there.
Thank you.
So at this point, I don't think we have resolution. We did ask for a deficiency list from engineering, and I think they can include in that handicapped accessibility issues in the deficiency list, and also give us a list on lighting and ask staff to look at a list of items on, including park space on the north end of town.
We talk about lighting improvements. As I read them, we're talking about lighting improvements within the palm trees, and that's uplighting. That's not particularly safety lighting. I think if we're talking about typical street lighting, that's something different. And
I think it was a combination of the two.
Yeah.
I think it's reference to the city's projects elsewhere to provide that downlighting to the sidewalk.
Would we normally require street lighting along this frontage?
That's a question for engineering.
Actually, it's engineering and planning. I believe the city has a dark sky ordinance that.
Yeah.
Can I make a comment, Madam Chair? I mean, I personally would like to get the benefit in the neighborhood, as the applicant has stated. I think that's the most powerful way of having public benefit. But I think maybe just limiting it to that segment from this project up to Via Escuela.
It's too limiting.
Well, yeah, and I think, everything needs to be done, in my mind, in a comprehensive way. I mean, if you're going to have conduit going to these palm trees and providing lighting and so forth, I think, personally, I think that entire stretch along there is very dangerous. I mean, I go to Rick's quite a bit, even during the daylight hours. It's scary there. So I think, I would rather see, I don't know how it could be, given this correct sense of proportionality for this project in terms of something like that. But even if it's, Lynn mentioned paying into the traffic signal, well, that's already done, but maybe the applicant pays into some sort of local improvement district that actually deals with safety issues, lighting and so forth, sidewalk improvements. I think that way the city could, get a lot of bang for the buck for some of these things. Because I've always, you guys have heard me many times complaining about pedestrian safety and the importance of that in the city.
Is there a crosswalk at Via Escuela in Indian? That's a dangerous street. They've got a hotel, new housing going up.
The problem with any of these crosswalk projects, a great deal of study has to go into them. They do traffic studies and to determine whether, in fact, it's called for. So this is a benefit that would be out into the future based on the due diligence that would have to be done to see if one was even necessary.
Do we have an improvement district for that area? My guess is we don't. Do we, Flynn? Something we need to think about. If we had enough discussion on this and people have a sense that we want something in the neighborhood, we want it to be significant. I don't mind if it's park space or bike issue. I mean, there are a number of safety issues that we can look at. But I think we need and we do need the list of deficiencies and a sense of what the uplighting, still the uplighting would cost. And how extensive people would like it to be.
Yeah, and I'd like to see more about the idea of the public benefit being park space in the Chino cone. Just evaluate it, see what it would mean.
We've gotten a letter.
It's just a little hard to make it related to this project.
It's the closest park space. We related to another project putting trees in Ruth Hardy Park, and it was a couple of miles from Ruth Hardy Park, wasn't it? Or a mile?
The project that put trees in Ruth Hardy Park was Sol.
And that was how far from?
It was at Caballeros and Amado. And Ruth Hardy Park is at Caballeros and Tamarisk. It was the closest park to the project site.
So possibly we look to see what the closest park, also look at what the closest park to the project site is, whether it's Chino Cone or,
I'm going to throw something else into the mix.
what?
I'm going to throw something else into the mix. So I was just looking on Google. The palm trees that are in front of the project look like they're the correct spacing. But if you go just to the north, the hotel just to the north of that, all the way to Via Escuela, there's hardly any palm trees. So maybe the public benefit could be upgrading the street frontage of the other two projects, one they own and one is between the two that they own, with the correct palm tree spacing and the
Again,
lighting.
the palm trees between the project and Via Escuela.
Yeah.
Be something.
At least there's a nexus to where they are, and it would be nice.
Has City Council expressed any conditions or things that they would like to see as public benefits?
They commissioned us to come back and asked us to include affordable housing in the changes to the PD, affordable housing as a public benefit. But we haven't done the changes to the PD yet, and we were going to propose those to City Council.
Is that the only thing that they came up with?
That's the only, it was one commissioner's comment, and it was the only comment.
Yeah, they didn't really get into specificity. It's just that they directed staff to go ahead and proceed with the revisions to the plan development ordinance and the associated public benefit policy.
Well, I would like to see the staff take a look at the possibility of upgrading finalizing the palm trees essentially between the site and Via Escuela.
I would support that.
Sidewalks, trees, lighting.
Well, we're already told the sidewalk
Right.
is okay, right?
I think they were going to come back with what we were told there were sloping issues. So come back with those deficiency list and a list of how many trees are deficient.
And the driveway issue regarding
And the
ADA
driveway
compliance.
And looking at the driveway on both sides.
We'll come back with the list.
Okay, since we haven't finalized it, I would take a motion to continue this to a date uncertain so that we get the architectural work done, we get a revision on the conditions, and we get the information on public benefit from staff.
Did we decide on the AAC question?
We can take, I thought that people thought we didn't, well, was there let's just let's take a voice vote on AAC before we can, so we understand what we're in favor of. All in favor of the AAC, sending this back to the AAC, hands? Split, we'll make it 4. Or did Lynn didn't?
Well, we haven't said the no. We never.
Can we say no?
Vote.
Can we take no votes, sending it back to AAC? So it's 4-2. And then coming back to us for public benefit, for conditions, and for a review of the plans. So I have a motion. Do I have a motion and a second?
I'll second.
Who made the motion?
All right, I'll make the motion.
Commissioner Callardine has made a motion. It's seconded by Commissioner Donenfeld. Can you call the roll, please?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Just quickly on the AAC issue, can I make a suggestion? Is that a list is sort of prepared of the concerns that we had relative to what they should be looking at.
Right.
To be honest, too often I think AAC concentrates on landscape to good effect, But I
Right.
think in this case, maybe, Ken, if you could be more specific with AAC in terms of what we'd like to see. Because I'd like that AAC review to be as successful as possible.
The only alternate would be to have a subcommittee of ourselves and some of the architects from AAC review this.
I would prefer that.
I think that might be quicker, and I would, I'm going to appoint Commissioner Maruzzi, Commissioner Hudson, and Commissioner Hirschbein to that subcommittee, and asking 2 of the architects from AAC to join us.
I prefer that to sending it back. So would we not send it back?
I agree with that. Do all 3 of you want to do it? I just appointed you.
I don't know if 3, I would have said the opposite, 3 from AAC and 2 from here.
And 2 from here.
Then I wouldn't be one of the 2.
Okay.
Well, you're the architects.
Well, I was just trying to get a majority, so we had 5 people, so we would have 3 votes in favor. Good, you're on. Those are our issues, though. It's already gone to them, so. Okay.
What is the direction then on that, please?
So instead of sending it back to the AAC, I think the way I would state the motion is you've heard our concerns on the conditions. You've heard our concerns on the architecture. It would go to a subcommittee of Planning Commission and AAC. We would prefer that they appoint architects to it, although we do want to see landscape across it, right? More.
The landscape's pretty good.
Those 2 buildings and some landscape on Palm Canyon. I mean, on Indian Canyon. There isn't any landscape in Indian Canyon, is there? So we do want to see that. Yes. So the 2 people that we're going to appoint, we'll make it a 4-person subcommittee. The 2 architects from planning, and preferably 2 architects from AAC.
So it's going to be Commissioner Hudson and Commissioner Hirschbein from the Planning Commission, and then
Yes.
2 AAC members.
Yes.
Both of whom are architects.
Yes.
Thank you.
So with that, Flynn, this has to be a time uncertain, doesn't it?
Since
Unless, or should we do a date certain?
Well, you've already voted.
Right, we did.
You voted to a date uncertain, which means that we have to renotice the item.
So if I ask to do it to a date certain, so we don't need to redo it, being one of the people who voted yes, I'm going to ask that we recall, the motion and do this to a date certain. Is 1 month? Can you come back with drawings on those buildings, 1 month? So our second meeting in February? So the motion then, do you want to remake the motion?
We'll make it everything it was before, except that it's now to a date certain of the second meeting in February. February 20th. Definitely, a date certain.
Let's see, just to correct, that's February 28th.
Oh, I'm sorry, February 28th, then. I heard February 20th.
Are you seconding this motion?
I'm seconding it.
A remotion.
So the motion is Wormack, second is Donenfeld.
Motion is Callardine, seconded Donenfeld.
Okay, Commissioner Donenfeld.
Yes.
Hirschbein. Hudson.
Yes.
Maruzzi.
Yes.
Vice Chair Callardine.
Yes.
Chair Wormack.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Okay, Planning Commission reports, requests, and comments. Commissioner Donenfeld.
I have one. Flynn, I have a question for you. The bar on Palm Canyon, for which we approved a mural some time ago, has now gone out of business. Under the mural ordinance, isn't that mural required to be removed once the occupant is no longer in occupancy? It's very prominent and quite controversial.
Unless you don't like women, unless you love women and snakes.
I never liked that one.
City Council just passed a new ordinance, didn't they? Second reading tonight. Right.
Let's see, it's only in the case if the property is sold that it would have to be removed. But what I would recommend is that we do monitor it as
Take a look at it, yeah, I think so.
Because there are maintenance requirements, there is a covenant to maintain it, so those are the critical issues there.
Any other Planning Commission report
Yeah,
or
I just
request?
have a question of clarification. Are all technical studies for CEQA tendered by the city and paid for by the applicant? All? Traffic, noise, whatever, if there's a specific...
Correct. The city is responsible for doing the environmental review, and how we do that is the city has consultants on call. The applicant pays the deposit, actually pays the fees for doing the work, but the city is responsible for doing the CEQA. Yeah. We try to avoid that. We did have one case, Serena Park, where we did a peer review. The applicant had already started on the EIR, and so in that case we did a peer review, but for all others.
So in the case of the traffic study that was done for the Infusion project, that was, you guys tendered that specifically to them?
What they do is they give us the initial studies, and then our consultant reviews that.
Your consultant. What do you mean by that? Your consultant reviews it?
That our consultant reviews the traffic analysis that they provided to us and uses that as a basis for developing their mitigation measures.
So the contract for the traffic study was between the city and that traffic?
Let's see, Ken, correct me if, oh, he's not even here.
Whether it's traffic study or anything, I mean,
yeah, typically what we have our applicants do is there's some initial environmental studies that they provide to us, which our consultant uses in completing the initial study and then developing either the mitigation measures or the negative declaration. And so the study that you saw with Infusion Beach, if I remember correctly, the initial work was prepared by RK.
Yeah, I think it was RK.
Yeah. And then our consultant, who was Nicole Christ, then used that in preparing
But who paid RK?
The applicant paid RK.
See, that's the thing I have a problem with. I think all studies, this is just my opinion based on my experience working for companies that do this sort of thing, that all studies should be paid for by the city. That the consultant that is working with the applicant should not hire the people who are doing the studies, because they can be tailored. They can tend to be somewhat, I don't want to use the word biased, but
I'd like to have a discussion of this item. Having been in that industry, there's pros and cons of doing it both ways, because you really need the studies done just to have the applicant formulate his proposal in a lot of cases. So then turning around and saying you can't use those studies because they weren't prepared, because they were prepared by the under contract of the applicant, creates a problem. What the CEQA law clearly allows, although some jurisdictions go further, I'll admit, is that the city's representative, in this case, Terra Nova, Nicole Christ, has to independently validate them. They have to have their own independent validation, right, that those technical studies are accurate. Requiring, particularly for a negative declaration, that we require that all of them be prepared under contract to the city is a big step. I mean, there are some jurisdictions that do that. There are other jurisdictions that say even the EIR can be prepared under contract of the applicant. So there's a
Yeah, I know.
And
I think
CEQA specifically allows
I think Pasadena is the one that's more strict, and I think Santa Monica may also be.
Right. So that's a big discussion item that I think.
Okay, well, that's something that I care deeply about, so I'd like to discuss it, like maybe a study session or something.
The department does typically.
So that's a discussion that we could I mean, obviously, we can't make any decisions, but it's a discussion we could schedule with you, although it's your purview as to how you handle it. Am I correct on that? It's not something the commission can do anything but ask you about. But we could schedule, we don't, our purview is limited, and we don't make just policy
So it's something the
decisions.
city manager would have to make a decision about?
Yeah,
City council
ultimately,
can
the
provide
city
direction
manager
to-
through the department director.
I believe that the city council did provide some direction that the EIRs have to be independently prepared.
Yeah, but that's, okay, I'm talking about the independent studies, the
Right.
studies themselves.
Is this a discussion you would be open to having?
Yes, I'd be open to having, but I want to get through some other things that we've already got on our plate
Right, so
first.
it's something that we can schedule.
In the future.
We have several subcommittees working right now, hopefully. Just in terms of our subcommittees, has the demolition subcommittee met?
No, we have not yet.
We did have a meeting of the
Golf course?
the golf course subcommittee, and we're having one next Wednesday. And the PD subcommittee, you haven't called that together yet.
Probably within the next 2 weeks, we'll have a meeting of the PDD subcommittee.
And the historic sites issue with HSPB we've not yet had a
Correct,
joint.
that's the
what I was
demolition
referring
issue.
to as- Yeah. Okay, so you want to get through some of those things.
I kind of do, yes.
But we'll try and schedule this sometime
Later
June-ish.
this spring.
Later this spring. Is that, are there other questions that people have? Yes.
I was wondering about the downtown project. We, Planning Commission approved some very lovely, extensive site amenities that haven't shown up there yet. Do you know if they're meant to, is that on tap? Or
Yes, those are still required to be installed. There have been some issues in terms of in front of the storefronts that aren't yet leased. Some of the amenities that were placed there have already been damaged.
By the construction?
No. Yeah, vandalism. So
Really? What happened?
there's a couple of the benches and things like that that were destroyed.
That's not even the nice stuff. That's like,
Yeah, that's not even the nice stuff yet. So there's still a number of things that they have to complete on Block C. So as a condition of approval, before we'll issue certificates of occupancy for certain storefronts in Block C, they do have to complete all of the landscape and hardscape improvements. So we still have the ability to require those. Again, they're just waiting for those storefronts to fill up before
including
they...
the plaza that goes by the hotel? Because there was a lot of stuff in that area in front of
Yeah, for example, the
Starbucks.
sculpture and things like that that we have
Not
going
just the
in.
sculpture, but there was a lot, there's
Yeah.
some pretty extensive, yes, site
Seating
furniture.
area,
Yeah.
fire pit.
Because Il Corso hasn't gone in yet and House of Poke haven't gone in it, those are the two locations where they'll have great visibility of that area and be able to patrol it for us. And so we're kind
Yeah,
of
that's
waiting.
discouraging.
Who hasn't gone in yet? I'm sorry.
Il Corso, the restaurant behind H&M, and then House of Poke is the one that's on the corner of Museum Way and the Paseo.
They haven't pulled building permits yet, or?
Yes, they already have their TIs. They're working on building out.
You'll see him on like.
What's
This is a
happening
concrete
on the TI, on the C, the A building, the real estate office?
Let's see, I don't know. They've been approved. They have their conditional use permit in place, but I don't know if we've reviewed their tenant
they have-
improvements yet or not.
It's a long time.
Yeah, it has been a long time.
Is there a point where their approval runs out if they don't move in?
2 years. They have 2 years to exercise their conditional use permit.
That's not nearly 2 years though.
No, I think we're about a year and a couple of months into it.
It's just not good that it's a dark space.
I think we're getting the signal that city council wants to start setting up.
Do you have a planning director's report for it?
I don't have anything to report to you this evening.
We are adjourning until 1:30 on Wednesday, February 14th.
So you're up there kind of the whole week or the whole?
The whole week,
Fusion
and
Beach.
I'm up there.
It's getting bigger and bigger.
Finish my house on Friday.
You're up there